Welcome to the Report, where we watch and talk about every episode of the Colbert Report from 2005 to 2014. That's a lot of episodes. I'm Nathaniel.
And I'm Alex.
And Colbert's guest on this episode is Richard Clarke.
So I noticed that he doesn't start off with tonight like usual. He just goes into the first
Intro
statement.
Yeah.
We talk about the death penalty. He mentions 1,000 points of death, 1,000 points of light is what George H.W. Bush said was sort of his slogan during his campaign. So
yeah. Then he does a bit about getting anthrax through email.
Yeah, he said because he was sitting down with Richard Clarke, who was a counterterrorism person.
Yeah. And a Windows 98 crash joke.
That's because there was a Seattle monorail crash, so he says that, like, the last thing that crashed in Seattle was Windows 98 or something like that. He starts off by continuing the thing from last episode about Rick Springfield returning to General Hospital. And he says that once he starts tomorrow, it'll be the best soap again. And he says he can't get Jesse's Girl out of his head, but he doesn't seem to know the words.
So he sings it.
He asks Bobby to finish, but he doesn't know the song.
Yeah.
And then they have Rick Springfield show up and he starts singing it.
Yep.
And had Lisa Loeb show up before, so I imagine that was probably something they intended to do somewhat regularly.
Yeah.
And I think they might. I was wondering if they planned the thing in the first episode just around a way to get Rick Springfield to cameo.
I think they probably did it as a joke and realized they could actually get him later.
Yeah, I imagine because he was returning to the show, he was probably traveling to promote it.
In New York, so.
And then Colbert says he's going to travel to Turin for the Winter Olympics, which are coming up. I can remember that a little bit because they wanted to see the parade, to see the flags. And so he lists every biathlon event, which there are 10 because there are 5 different events, and he lists the men's and women's one separately.
The men's are slightly longer.
Yeah, the men's are slightly longer. You have the individual, you have the sprint, which is shorter. You have the pursuit, which is where you start based on where you finished in the sprint.
Okay.
The mass start, where you all start at the same time.
So is the sprint a separate event from pursuit, or does pursuit have a sprint and then a...
It's a separate event, but only the people that competed in the sprint compete in pursuit. And then the relay, which is more self-explanatory.
Yeah.
Then he just adds ice dancing in there at the end.
It's called ice dancing?
That's what they call that kind of figure skating with 2 people.
Okay.
And so the new medal designs for the Turin Olympics have a hole in the middle, which Colbert says makes them look like a giant gold washer or a subway token.
Yeah.
It does. And I looked it up, that's the only medals that have ever had holes in the middle.
Yeah. Goes on a joke about a family breaking apart for your career to just win a gold washer. I always do wonder with, like, for example, luge, which is a sport he brings up in his joke, is how do you get into obscure sports like that?
That is really kind of the problem, too, is like, it is kind of one of the unfortunate things for Olympic athletes is that, well, on the one hand, the sports that get the most attention to the Olympics are the ones that aren't professional because nobody was paying attention to them before then. Yeah. It also means they don't really have a career after their Olympics.
Maybe they have 2 Olympics, like if they're lucky.
Yeah, they get sponsorships, but those don't. I know this tweet showing Michael Phelps promoting some sports betting website, and he said, like, it is kind of funny to see, I guess, how fast it could.
Yeah. Well, how many Olympics did Michael Phelps do? 3?
Yeah.
And that's a pretty...
No, he did 4, I think.
That's a long career.
Yeah.
I always wondered that. I assume that's why, especially in the Winter Olympics, like, smaller countries have a big advantage anyway, just because they're cold and people will be doing those sports anyway.
Probably.
That's why Norway has an advantage.
They're not going to have skiers from countries where they don't have skiing.
Yeah.
So.
Whereas with the Summer Olympics, I feel there are more events where it's possible to, no matter the climate, for you to become good at the sport.
He cites that they had a hole because it was supposed to be like a piazza, which was said to be one of the themes, or as he says, he cites the Olympic Committee, the great symbol image of Italy, elegant translation, he comments.
Yeah.
That wasn't up online, but looking at the website from the time, there was a website that indeed referred to the piazza as the symbol image of Italy, because it was translated from Immagine Simbolo dell'Italia.
Yeah.
And which doesn't have the great part, so I think he just added that in. And it seems like image symbol is Immagine Simbolo is just something they say in Italian.
Okay.
They just mean it does literally mean image symbol, but it's not a phrase we have in English.
Yeah, clearly.
Yeah.
And then
he says, you know what else is a great symbol image of Italy? The pizza. And that does look like an Olympic medal.
It has no hole in it.
And I mean, it's a pretty similar word to piazza. It would be kind of funny if they actually made it pizza shaped, but
yeah, Olympic medals usually have. I just never focused on the separate designs they have. I guess they
do have separate designs. Yeah. Although they're not usually.
What are the Paris Olympic medals designs look like? How often are they weird shaped? Was that the only time?
I mean, it's the only time with a hole, but
yeah,
you can see these are what the medals look like.
Okay, have they not released the ones for?
I think they have.
Paris?
Yeah, they have, but I guess on the website I just stumbled upon it didn't have it up front for some reason. So he talks about the more creative medal designs they could have done, which were shaped like Italy, the Alps, a smart Prada handbag,
or a boot.
Yeah, shaped like Italy. And of course, he contrasts the smart Prada handbag with the design, which he claims is stupido. I imagine that that Colbert writers probably did think it looked a bit ridiculous, but
it's a weird design.
It is a weird design. I mean, it doesn't seem like anybody else tried to repeat it. So.
Yeah. And he
talks about the mascots, Neve and Glee's, Snowball and Ice Cube.
Olympic mascots are always weird.
Yeah, they're always weird though. So that's
because I feel like you'd always hear about them more before the actual Olympics.
Yeah,
I don't feel like I've ever seen them.
But I know one of the things that really didn't work was when they did Izzy for the Atlanta Olympics because they unveiled him all the way back in Barcelona, and by the time of the actual Olympics, they realized people didn't like him.
What does Izzy look like?
Izzy just looks like this weird blue blob thing.
What are the most popular?
I'm not sure. Yeah,
are there any popular Olympic mascots that are still popular to this day?
I'm not sure. I know in Australia they made an unofficial one, Fatso the Fat Arse Wombat. I think there actually is a statue of him even though.
For which, Sydney?
Yeah.
Okay.
So then they move on to the next subject, which is the death penalty, and he talks about how Kenneth Lee Boyd was the 1,000th person executed in the U.S. since the death penalty was allowed by the Supreme Court in 1976.
Yeah.
I think it was not that much earlier than that they had the ruling that stopped it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Kenneth Lee Boyd had killed his wife and her father in 1988. Yeah. He was in
so how come people stay on death row for so long? How come?
I'm guessing because the idea is to give them as many chances as possible,
just in case they find anything.
Yeah, I imagine because of some things that probably want to plan executions out pretty far in advance. So
I guess so. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a bit odd, but I guess that's how it.
But I figure it's part of the point is you want to.
Yeah.
You want them to die fast, right?
Maybe, but I mean, I guess not. And so the person that was due to be the 1,000th death sentence was Robin Lovett, who was commuted by Virginia Governor Mark Warner.
Why was he commuted?
Let's get into that because, I mean, his sentence was commuted. He wasn't let out entirely, but he was spared from the death sentence. And his crime was that he was involved in a pool hall robbery in 1998, and the owner was stabbed to death, for which he was convicted.
Okay.
And Colbert says it was due to a technicality of evidence. Evidently, they're not allowed to throw it out due to a lack of storage space. Seems funny, but it is pretty much what happened because it doesn't seem like the evidence is that exonerating because he does still seem like the prime suspect, but the witness told the governor that he wasn't sure enough he did it to give him the death penalty. And they point out the evidence in storage was destroyed despite there had been a law passed in Virginia a few months earlier to forbid that from happening in capital cases.
Yeah.
It seems like the person thought that because Lovett's previous appeal to the Virginia Supreme Court was denied that meant he was all set. But
they just couldn't. The evidence didn't.
Yeah, so I think Robin Lovett is still in prison.
Yeah, and Colbert's upset because he made 7-layer dip for the occasion.
Yeah, and avocado doesn't keep, so he can't just.
So he can't do it again.
And that gets us to tonight's word, which is spectacle. It says that the death penalty was at the lowest level of support in 25 years. According to Gallup, it was 64% at the time. Currently, it's 53%. It's kept going down. I think 25 years before this is when it first started going up again after it went down to almost even in the 60s. I imagine probably because crime went up, but then ever since then it's been declining slowly.
Yeah.
It says that must be because people find it somehow cruel to strap somebody down and inject them with poison.
Yeah.
And then he said that the 1K mark would have been a great opportunity to promote the death penalty for a new generation. The one is life too extreme. Now you're wondering if they bring up the execution roller coaster.
Well, that's an extreme. Feels extreme. You know?
I'm not sure if they come up with that, but yeah, it would have definitely been a way that it honestly sounds like something he would have made up.
Yeah.
And I honestly bet if they had known about it, they would have found a way to work it in.
I wonder if it comes up at all, and it comes up eventually on the show.
It might.
It feels like one of the things.
And Colbert claims that the stats prove the deterrent prove that it's an effective deterrent. It says, I know you in the factosphere might want to... I guess it might have been a thing because they did have the blogosphere around this time, too.
Yeah.
So it was based on, like, atmosphere and bio.
There's something else here,
yeah. And so he says, well, you got me. I'm guilty as charged with making it up. It does seem like there aren't really any conclusive studies saying that it's an effective deterrent, so he's probably right. He says, what are you going to do, execute me? I mean, that's not going to be a deterrent. Nailed ya.
Yep.
And so he says it's just a fact he knows in his gut.
Yeah.
I mean, lethal injection is why I haven't murdered anyone. But when his second is his wood chipper doesn't work.
Yeah.
So he says that the crimes that he thinks would also be deterred by execution would be robbery, assault, and ticket scalping. Points out another, and the bolt.
Is ticket scalping actually a crime?
I don't think so. Maybe if you do it in certain ways, but I don't think.
It's a social crime.
And he says there'd be more organs to harvest as the bullet point, which I think is the thing countries are accused of doing.
Yeah. Do they actually harvest the organ?
I think sometimes, but imagine it depends on the way they killed them. Because
well, with lethal injection,
it wouldn't work.
Yeah.
And so he points to the list of the countries with the death penalty. Since the list, 26 countries have abolished it. Although I'm not sure if those were all on the list, because I know Bolivia wasn't, because I think that list was only ones that were still actively executing people.
Which is probably fair.
Yeah. It seemed like in the UK it took a while to do it for good, because it seemed like they stopped doing it in the 60s and 70s, but they didn't abolish it for treason for a while, and I think it was in 1997 that happened. And then in Jersey they still apparently had a law along for execution. They got rid of it in 2003. So.
But only in Jersey?
Yeah.
How come the Parliament doesn't have authority over there?
I think it's because it's technically a crown dependency or something.
Okay. But Guernsey isn't?
I think it is too.
Oh.
Yeah. And he also runs through the list he was provided of countries before the crawl was finished, so he just starts adding extra ones.
Yeah.
He sees, I noticed. And then he says, I'm sure there's some Western countries on that list. Of course there aren't. Yeah. Currently, Wikipedia lists the other advanced democracies with regular executions as Japan, Singapore, and Taiwan.
Which, small number.
And so he's disappointed that the Catholic Church is against the death penalty. I think it's been for a while.
Yeah.
And he says, they wouldn't have had a religion if there was no capital punishment.
Jesus.
So he said we need to add Zaz to the proceedings, or as the bullet points out, sizzle might be more appropriate.
Yeah.
There's caning for the opening act, and he uses that picture I mentioned earlier of Tucker Carlson that looks like his teeth are missing. So.
It's a bad picture of him.
Yeah, I'm curious how that happened. I'm curious why they thought of it as like the idea that the cane took his teeth out or something.
Oh.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe that's what I thought, but
okay, I thought it was because Tucker Carlson.
Probably, yeah. And they said they should get Aerosmith to play and pick a man of the hour who's a big name. So let's hold the phone brainstorm. So let's make it Saddam. Saddam would be executed at the end of 2006, and I think his video was actually of him being executed did get leaked. So
how many views did it have?
Yeah.
How many views?
I probably will. Seems like the last public execution in the U.S. was in the 1930s, it seems. But it seems like families of the victims of the Oklahoma City bombings were allowed to witness Timothy McVeigh's execution. So there's an exception there.
I wonder how they decide that.
Not sure.
And why that hasn't been done ever again.
And so he says, we'll have to wait for sure, but it's 90% of it is the casting. The 10% of it is the potassium chloride. It says, so the announcer's going to say dead man walking, but let's just not just have that. Let's have a dead man skateboarding. It says we should have a contest winner, inject him with a lethal dose, maybe by text message. The whole point proposes, and then they can eat him on Fear Factor. Do you know who the host of Fear Factor was?
Who is?
It's Sergey and it's somebody that's still well known today.
I don't know.
Joe Rogan was the host.
Joe Rogan was at that time.
Yeah, it seems like they did bring it back. I think it moved networks from NBC to MTV, and that was a different host after that. But I think it was Ludacris was the host on the MTV one. And so it said capital punishment spreads the message: "Thou shalt not kill."
Yep.
The next one is tip of the hat, wag of the finger. And so he always starts this with something about judging. So he said, Jesus says, judge not lest ye be judged. And he said, let's just do this while he's away.
Yep.
And do the song My Fair Lady about saving shirt up. Seems like people have asked about that because saying so you're saying you shouldn't judge anyone, and he's saying more like you shouldn't judge people for things you're guilty of yourself.
Yeah,
because that's
right. What the quote would mean.
Yeah. And so he gives a tip of the hat to Seattle
for being the most
literate city, according to a study by Central Connecticut State University,
which he makes a joke about because
it's the Harvard of Central Connecticut.
Yeah,
it's the other Connecticut State universities are Western, Southern, and Eastern. Central Connecticut State University is in New Britain. Yeah, which is pretty close to Hartford.
No, UConn is a state school, though, right?
It is, yeah. I think it's probably like Pennsylvania has the other.
Yeah, I figured.
Like a lot of states have two different state school systems.
I figured.
And so he says that he's been literacy's biggest advocate, and then he explains to illiterate people what advocate means. Yeah. And then I was able to call this joke pretty well when he says that Minneapolis barely lost, but they should have been disqualified. And it was a joke about Prince changing his name to the love symbol.
Yeah, because...
Yeah.
Or the Prince symbol. Is it?
I think he called it the love symbol or something.
But it's
yeah.
Prince symbol. Was that his legal name?
I don't think he could legally change it, but I think he did.
Well, his legal name wasn't Prince anyway, was it?
I mean, his full name was Prince Rogers Nelson.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, like, the idea is he thought that it would get him out of... He could use it to argue that his record contract was invalid because he refused to perform under Prince anymore. But, yeah. I think what they responded is they actually wound up getting people to download, like, a special Office program that had that as part of its font.
Yeah. Are you supposed to read the symbols of the artist formerly known as Prince?
I'm not sure. Maybe. I mean, that is what he called himself.
Yeah.
And so he gives a wag of his finger to the Seattle monorail crash on November 26th. They clipped each other on the side. No, it wasn't that serious, but it did shut down the system for a bit. So there were 2 people that were hurt.
Yeah. Like I asked, did the monorail come to be because of the...
It was during the same expo as the Space Needle.
Okay.
It's not that long. It seems like they have proposed lengthening it, but they've, I guess, determined it would be too expensive.
Is it the only monorail in a city in the U.S.?
I don't think so. But...
Okay.
And so he says that he's always been speaking out against monorails since he was a local news anchor at WPTS in Patterson Springs, North Carolina, which is a real city, but it only has 622 people. And there is a WPTS, but it's a radio station in Pittsburgh and not a TV station.
So he just made it up.
Yeah. This time it captions it with the date. I don't remember if he did that with when he did this bit later, because he does do this bit a lot where he's like a younger version of himself with a mustache.
Does he always keep it as Patterson Springs, North Carolina?
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, that would make sense. Yeah. Probably an allusion to him starting out in South Carolina too. So.
Yeah. Did he start as a radio host?
No, he didn't. I imagine part of it is like...
What did he do in South Carolina to start?
I'm not sure. I think like after he went to college at Northwestern is when he started his comedy career in Chicago. So I'm not sure if he did that much work in South Carolina.
Okay.
But I know like he did say that he developed his news anchor accent even back then because he was afraid of what it would be like if he had a Southern accent for the rest of his life. So
Well, you say he listened to the radio, right?
Or like to the TV. So.
Yeah, while he was sleeping.
So yeah, he complains about like how ridiculous it is. How can a train run on one rail? It's like running on one foot. It says, what kinds of people ride bikes on one wheel? Clowns. That's who.
Yep. And then he wags...
He gives a wag of his finger to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which announced that his 2006 inductees would include Blondie, Miles Davis, and Black Sabbath. Of course, you notice Miles Davis is kind of an odd induction, but I feel like they did also kind of limit themselves by calling themselves the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, given that...
There's no, like, Music Hall of Fame, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like now it might more be a de facto popular music hall of fame. It's just that you can get in easier if you're a rock person, like, I think. But
and also, Leonard Skinner and Sex Pistols got in?
Those were the other ones that got in that year.
Okay.
And then he talks about how Herb Alpert and Jerry Moss were inducted in the non-performer category for running A&M Records. But he objects to the fact that Herb Alpert couldn't get in as a performer.
Yeah. Because
he was initially famous for being a band leader of Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass. And then he plays one of his most famous pieces from that, Spanish Flea, which is
the hold music song.
Yeah. Well, one of the hold music. Yeah. The hold music song that Colbert actually uses as a joke later will be The Girl from Ipanema. So. Yeah. And he calls it Spanish Fly at the time, though, and Spanish Fly is like a kind of like supposed aphrodisiac thing. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if Spanish Flea was an alternate name for the same thing. But of course, being somebody that knows about these weird things, I actually did know that it was called Spanish Flea, and so I thought. Yeah. But fortunately, he actually figured it out by the next commercial break, and he says, "Oh, sorry, our phone books were running off. Our phone exchange is running off." Yeah, he probably just read the prompter wrong. Yeah. Especially, which makes sense because the Spanish Fly is a real thing. Yeah. And also just Flea and Fly look the same. Yeah. And I do remember digging up that one interview from the writers about the one who was thrilled that he could get the Cars on the show. So there's probably a lot of people that knew about weird music, like bringing funny music knowledge things. And he says that the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame can't say that he's not rocking enough because he inducted James Taylor, who, indeed, is probably about as soft rock. Yeah. And then he talks about how... He gives a finger wag to the NYPL. I don't think to them themselves, because the New York Public Library auctioned off their 2 Gilbert Stuart Washington portraits The one that sold was the Constable Hamilton portrait, which someone named William Constable bought to give to Alexander Hamilton. That one, and both of them were valued at $22 million, but only that one sold for $8 million. And it was bought by the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art, which is the museum the Waltons founded in Arkansas.
Is it still there?
It's still there.
How come it's Walmart, not Walmart?
I don't know.
Does it just sound better?
Maybe because it's sort of two separate syllables.
Yeah. I don't know. I would think Walt is the first symbol in Walton.
Maybe. But it could be Wall Town.
Yeah. But he gives a wag to Sotheby's
for embarrassing Washington. And he says it's a British conspiracy.
Because Sotheby's is British.
And he says, like, I mean, because, for $22 million, you could get 22 million portraits of Washington.
Dollar bill.
I remember on the History Detective show, they made a joke talking about how Gilbert Stuart sold his first portrait of Washington to the Mint for $100 and says, well, now you can get it for just one.
Yep.
Maybe it wasn't to the Mint, because I think that was pretty late that they finally made it.
Yeah.
And then he says, if you mess with us again, you're on notice. What's left of the British Empire? Sun has set. He says, in reference to the famous saying of the sun never setting on the...
The sun still does not set on the...
Yeah, because they still kept the Pitcairns in the Pacific.
Yep.
The sun still doesn't set. He doesn't bring out the board, though, so I'm guessing he didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And you see another one of his commercial cards he filmed at the Capitol. This time he wags his finger at it.
Yeah.
And so then you get the bit where he corrects himself for saying Spanish fly earlier.
Yeah.
So now we get to the interview, which is with Richard A. Clarke, who I guess worked various government diplomatic positions. His first was in the State Department from 1985 to 1992. His top post was Assistant Secretary of State for Political Military Affairs under George H.W. Bush.
Yeah.
Then from 1992 to 2003, he was on the National Security Council, where he headed the Counterterrorism Security Group. They call him the Counterterrorism Czar later.
Yeah.
And he testified to the 9/11 Commission about how they tried to warn them that he might attack, and I think probably against the war in Iraq. And so the Bush administration got pretty mad at him for that, even though I think he had already left them by that time.
Yeah.
And so I imagine he was probably somewhat of a hero on the left, in a sense. But it seems like...
Has he done anything since?
It seems like after that he mostly just works for private firms and writes op-eds now.
Okay.
And so, the name of his book that criticized the handling of 9/11 was called Against All Enemies.
Yeah.
But that was in 2004.
It was pretty recent to criticize it.
Yeah.
Colbert asked him if Clarke is his real name, because security
because he could be a spy thing, his nom de spook,
as it were.
And then he says that his book is fiction. It's called The Scorpion's Gate. That's one he's promoting.
Yeah.
It seems like a lot of these people that work in this like writing thrillers about it, because I guess they realize they're popular and they realize maybe
it's probably easier for them.
The selling point that they actually have knowledge about it.
I wonder how real it is that when they actually write it, or if they just throw out the reality to the wind.
It's hard to say. I'm not sure if they're any better than the other one.
Yeah.
I imagine some of them probably hire ghostwriters too, because I doubt that they'd necessarily be as good as at the prose part.
Scorpion's Gate is a thriller about 4 to 5 people. Why does he say 4 to 5? Wouldn't he know if he wrote the book?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe he's not sure if one of them counts or not.
Yeah.
And he tries to stop the U.S. from going to war in the Middle East. It seems like what happened is that some people were trying to overthrow the Saudi government to start a theocracy. The Saudi government seems like a weird one, given that there's already a fair amount of Islamist aspects to it.
Yeah, it's monarchy, but...
Yeah. I mean, the Iran one was too, but that was a deliberately secular one, so it makes sense.
It's not impossible, I guess.
Yeah,
though, right?
It's not impossible.
But the people...
And so Colbert asks him, where did you get those ideas? Is the protagonist going to be a dashing young counter-terrorism czar? Yeah. Oh, and the thing was that he said this time the book actually was fiction, because he remembered the press secretary calling his book Against All Enemies fiction. So this time he said that he only got the idea for this one after leaving the White House, which makes sense, because you're probably only going to start working on those books. So.
Yeah.
Although, as mentioned in earlier episode, Scooter Libby did also write. I'll also imagine that even at when they were. And then he says, that's good that you left the White House, because then you don't have to give them a cut. And that is the thing the studios do, which I'm kind of surprised they still get away with, is they can demand to get rights to something you come up with. Well, working for them, even if it's not right.
Yep.
That becomes a pretty big plot point in the Silicon Valley TV show.
Yeah. But then he talks about how he tries to explain the book
as like a secret jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah, it's a weird metaphor, kind of.
And so he says it sounds like a kid's book.
Colbert says that.
Yeah.
But then Colbert brings up his book, which is what Stephen Colbert...
Tech Jansen,
Deep Space 7.
Alpha Squad
7.
Like that. And he openly says Tech Jansen is based on me, which seems like if it was a fan fiction, it would be just opening yourself up to flame bait.
Yeah.
Although on one hand, I do feel like maybe if people were being honest about self-inserts, they might not mind as much.
Yeah.
Of course, Tech Jansen would later get a comic book made out of it, too. So.
But then they We have that bit.
And so he talks about how now...
Richard Clarke talks about
how now you can't call the bad guys in Iraq insurgents. And Colbert makes the joke says, I mean, they can't be insurgents because all the people that
are in Iraq love us.
Which of course was something they tried to claim for a while that nobody quite believed. And he talks about how Rumsfeld said he had Clarke claims that Rumsfeld had an epiphany about this. Yeah. So he said, like, did the wise men come to him?
Yeah.
Maybe. And he says, now we're not saying insurgents, now they're enemies of the legitimate government in Iraq, or LGs. Which is
basically admitting the fact that there are people in Iraq who did not like the U.S.
Although, it seems like what he actually said was enemies of the legitimate Iraqi government, but ELIG might not be as funny of an acronym.
Yeah.
And also, it doesn't seem like anybody ever actually turned it into an acronym, Clarke, so...
Oh, so LGs was never used as a...
So then he asks, when will the global war on terror end? He says, when will the war on terror end? He says, well, it's the global war on terror, or what?
Yeah. Was that ever used either, or no?
I'm guessing probably the acronym got used, but I'm not... I'll look up.
What? GWOT.
Yeah, it seems like that. Google knows what I'm talking about.
When
so
you say
yeah. And you point out it does seem to be good at adding in his own humor in that. Like, Clarke, he was probably saving that joke for the end. And that worked out pretty well. And it also kind of sounds like Neil deGrasse Tyson in a way.
No, I agree. I thought I was actually thinking the same thing. Clarke. I mean, he's pretty cagey, but that makes sense. He's a security guy, so why would he be?
And so then we get to the end, which I like to call the oh hi moment, because he's always standing somewhere and says, oh hi, you just caught me.
Yeah.
And it seems like eventually he starts doing similar jokes from when he's sitting down at the desk, but this time it's because he still has all of his wall of stuff. And so he talks about how recently in France there was the first face transplant.
Yep.
The woman got her face bitten off by a dog. So I guess they found somebody that was going to die soon but was still alive. And
could you not take a face from a dead person?
Or something like that. I think it was brain dead. I'm not sure how the consent thing worked. I'm guessing the person must have agreed to it beforehand. But still, they were able to successfully transfer the face.
How many face transplants have there been since?
Seems like it happens occasionally, but it seems like she did wind up dying, not because of the reaction, but I guess because of some of the drugs she'd been taking before to treat the issues, sort of in some ways. But then he says that now we have to praise the unsung heroes of plastic surgery, the cosmetic surgeons, I assume as opposed to the ones that did the more obvious, the more necessary plastic surgery.
Yeah.
He says, who's going to plump our sunken cheeks, hoist our drooping buttocks, and thread serrated plastic sutures through our fatty layers onto our saggy necks, which is a thread lift, which is a real procedure. It seems like the benefit is that because you can remove the sutures, you don't have to worry as much about if it looks bad.
Oh. Yeah. That does seem convenient.
Yeah. And so, he says, so far they've had to live on obscurity on basic cable channels like E! They had a show of Dr. 90210 at the time, which ran from 2004 to 2008. It was around in 2020.
Was it like a soap about...
No, it's not a soap. It's a reality show.
Oh, reality show.
There was a drama series about plastic surgeons called Nip Tuck around the same time, but I don't know. I didn't mention that.
Yeah. But anyway, in commemoration of plastic surgeons, he decides to put a breast implant
on the shelf. It's hard to put down. Because, it's good to know that these people don't do it for the attention. They do it for the money.
Yeah.
That was that episode. First run of December. 8 more, and we're finished with the whole year. Signing off.